we have manuscripts attributed to a person who's a student of Abu Hurairah. This is even manuscripts. But of course, manuscripts are not the only thing. I mean, we have absorption and incorporation. So for example, it's not the fact that, okay, you don't have the manuscript, that the thing is not preserved. We don't believe in that. So for example, in Bukhari, there are things which were manuscripts at the time. Bukhari put it into his book. We don't have the original manuscript, but we have Bukhari. And so why wouldn't that count? If that makes sense. Even on a manuscript level. We have things, the same thing in Tirmidhi. We have same things in Sunan Nasa'i. We have different sunan that the same thing applies. It's called absorption and incorporation. So for example, the Sahifa As-Sadiq of Amr ibn al-As is included as part of Musnad Ahmad. Now obviously Ahmad ibn Hanbal died 241, it's very for long. But at his time he had access to that. He had that Sahifa in front of him. He had that particular manuscript in front of him. He wrote it down, we have it now. So he copied something which was a physical paper. Because there is a misconception that in Islam everything was through oral transmission. That everything was Chinese whispers or oral transmission or this kind of things. It's false. There were entire manuscripts that were copied by writing from one hadith scholar to another. And I'm giving you examples that this is by no means an exhaustive list. But Amr ibn al-As, as you know, is Sahabi. The Sahif of Ali ibn Abi Talib is included within Bukhari. And so on and so forth. Like the book of Zakat, written by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, is included in al-Bukhari, and so on. So we have that. We have manuscripts, people, and there's so many of those that were written by the ashab of the sunans and the jami'as and the hadiths and all these particular books of hadith. And we're still sticking with the script here. And for us, I should mention, we don't accept that this is the... Our method, as we'll come to see, is much more rigorous. Much harder than their method. You find the manuscript somewhere and you can attribute something to someone. You'll find that our method is actually much more critical than this. The hadith method is much more critical than this. But we're sticking with this. Why? Because it's what modern historians are used to. So we're giving them this anyway. And obviously one thing that was a recent discovery in 2015 was the Birmingham manuscript. That's very significant for a historian. For me, it's not, and for you and for faithful believers, it shouldn't be very significant because we don't base our faith on this. But we're making the argument. And we're saying, look, it's 95%, it's carbon dated to a degree of 95% to within the life of the Prophet ﷺ. It's carbon dated to a degree of 95% to within the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and which is 568 to 654 by the University of Oxford, and it's in the University of Birmingham. Once again, it's in a Western university. Now, that's a manuscript. And it is 2 folios, it's 2 pages, but it's commensurate with what we have. Now, we have other manuscripts. Obviously, the most complete one is the Topkapi one. And that's, people think it's Uthman's. It's not Uthman's one. This is like one century after the Prophet ﷺ's death. But it has basically 99.9% or 99.5% of the Quran. And it's a manuscript. And it's in line with what we're reciting today. And so you have a perfect match between the surahs that are in the Birmingham manuscript with that which is in the Topkapi manuscript. And there's a 99 point, all of the Quran is there. And then you have 95% radiocarbon dating to the time of the Prophet. What more do you want? I mean, to be honest with you, what more do you want? For a historian that's studying ancient, if they found this for the Bible, imagine you found something attributed to Jesus within his life, 2 scrolls. The Christians would have a good, I don't know what they would do. Unbelievable. There's no chance you're going to find anything like that in the first 100 years of Christianity. No chance at all, And so, subhanAllah, sometimes Allah uses the Orientalists, the historical revisionists, as a jundi, as a way to actually make Islam true, as a way of preserving the religion. وَلَا يَعْلَمُ جُنُودَ رَبِّكَ إِلَّا هُ. And no one knows the junud of Allah except for him. Allah can do taskhir of this believer to serve the religion of Islam. And so an Orientalist can serve the religion of Islam. He tries to attack it and actually he starts to realize there's more than this going on. And this is a good example of that. And this is an image of the manuscript here. Look how chunky it looks. I actually love this image. I mean, it looks very crisp, really beautiful writing. Imagine if they had a Bible looking like that. Imagine if they had it. I mean, imagine if you had something like the Old Testament, that even their process of choosing what books go into the Bible, is arbitrary. Athanasius did it in the 4th century. There's no even council that did it. Let alone have a book like this, full manuscript like that. I mean, let's be honest, man. I want to tell you something else, and this is almost a waste of time, but I need to mention it just because you need to be aware of the kinds of discourses that Orientalists in the academy and outside of the academy are putting forward. There's a guy called Dan Gibson, and what he tried to say is that, look, Mecca is an imaginary place. It's an imaginary place because if you look at the masjids, at the early Islam, they were not actually pointed to Mecca at all. In fact, they were pointed, sorry to say, they were pointed to Petra. So which means that the Qibla was actually not towards Mecca, but towards Petra itself. Okay, now he thought he was being, he wants to be the next Patricia Crona, of course, He wants to say something ridiculous, but he was refuted by his own peers. David King, who's a historian of some standing, I think it's King's University, but I can't remember if it's King's or not, but he contributed to Britannica, or the Encyclopedia of Islam. And even Dan Gibson, when he was trying to quote him, he quoted him incorrectly. Yeah, he refuted that, Gibson, and I'm going to read some of the things that he said. He said, Gibson published his book, Quranic Geography, in 2011. In it, he proved his own satisfaction that the Quran contains so few references to actual locations, including Mecca, that its origins must lie somewhere else, namely Petra. Funnily enough, the authoritative Encyclopedia of Islam has no entry for Petra, for nothing of consequence in early Islamic history happened there. So Gibson then briefly discussed some 30 early mosques which according to him faced towards Petra and not towards Mecca. His argumentation was weak indeed, not least because he did not present any orientations. The bibliography did not include a single work on the Qibla. This is now David King responding to Dan Gibson. Gibson's new book contains a dazzling array of information and plans of some 60 early mosques, treated more or less in chronological order, but therefore not by region, and is intended to show how the earliest mosques faced Petra, then between Petra and Mecca, then the false Qibla towards Mecca with variations on theme. He says, Gibson wishes to ingratiate himself with Muslim readers by showing by means of a survey of early mosque orientations that these early mosques are correctly aligned. But the catch is that they are correctly aligned towards Petra, but they are not. The quoted passage asserts that the Qibla of the companions of the Prophet who built the first mosque in Egypt was towards winter sunrise, not Petra. Gibson errs in thinking that the Qibla is towards the black stone, rather the Kaaba is towards the Kaaba itself. Gibson completely misunderstands my findings on the determination of the Qibla and mosque's orientation. Essentially, I found that Muslims for the first 2 centuries used folk astronomy, particularly astronomical horizon phenomena, the cardinal directions in solar risings and settings at solstices. Thereafter, they used Qiblas based on geographic coordinates and mathematical procedures. I claim that all mosques face the Qibla in ways of which we can now only understand. I will also say that early mosques do not face directions we moderns think they should. Now Gibson to claim they face Petra and accurately at that. He continues, you can read it. Maybe I should. Gibson's book is not, actually this is interesting. Gibson's book is not a scholarly work, for its text is of the kind one would expect from a first-year college student. Okay, college students, yeah? Where my works are quoted and misquoted, it is unclear who is the author. Gibson is not competent to write on early Islamic history and often misinterprets the very few serious sources he does consult. I counter Gibson's agnotological tour de force with the simple argument that the earliest Muslims could not have aligned mosques accurately towards Petra, or for that matter towards Mecca either. It is even easier to demolish Gibson's necessary backup thesis, which is that the first generations of Muslims had all necessary technical equipment, trigonometry, geometry, geographic coordinates, astronomical instrumentation to derive the direction of Petra accurately for any locality from Andalus to China. He's basically saying, how could they know if they're so far away from the Kaaba, where the Kaaba is, where the Qibla is? How do they know the direction of the Qibla? Because, you know, the astrolabes and these kind of things were invented much after. I mean, the things that would help orientate someone to know where the Qibla actually is. So he's saying that obviously he's looking at Google Maps, I don't know what he's looking at, and yes, Gibson, and he's saying, oh look, it's not actually towards, it's not actually, it's more like that. So he's saying it must be, that's his, as if these guys, they had the same ability, like they had like a compass on their phones, and they all brought it out, and they said, oh, so they must be bringing that way. This is Gibson. This is Gibson for you. I mean, this is what they have to say. That even their own guys that they say is not even a college student, a first-year college student would dare make a comment like this, yani. So the point is that these are the kinds of embarrassing things that they are led to, because they want to mention something new. But the truth of the matter is that Mecca, you ask, what's the evidence of Mecca then? Tell me the evidence of Mecca. I had this conversation with one, I don't know if I want to expose him or not, but one very famous historian in a setting. Yeah, in a university setting. I'm not going to expose him. But he writes books and this and that. He wrote a book on Ibn Taymiyyah and he's from Jewish background. And it's not John Hoover. But anyway, it's because he's very famous about Ibn Taymiyyah. It's someone else. And he said, like, Mecca is not even mentioned in the Quran. I said, yes, it is actually. He said, where? He said, it's not Mecca, it's Mecca. I said, it's mentioned Mecca. It's also mentioned Mecca actually as well in the Quran. He said, right, I said, Bibatni Mecca. It's an ayah in Surah Al-Fatih. It's mentioned. And he looked at it and I was like, is this the end of the argument? Is this it? Is this how easy it is? You just have to know one ayah. He said, it's not mentioned in the Quran. I told him the ayah. But I'll give you one better. I mean, the Quran, obviously, they'll say it's been invented by Abdul Malik ibn Marwan and maybe Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf Thaqafi, and they all came in and made the Quran. Which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, by the way, because a lot of the Quran is, you know, it's talking about the future in a certain way, it's talking about the present in a certain way. It doesn't even make sense to posit this. But let's say for the sake of argument. Interestingly, you'll find that there's evidence of Mecca in Christian literature. And this is very powerful. So I'm going to give you some interesting points. This is Clarke's commentary on the Bible. And this is the blessing, wherewith Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. The Lord came from Sinai, and rose up from Seir unto them. And he shined from Mount Paran. And he came with 10,000 of saints from his right hand, and went a fiery law for them. So where's this Paran? You ask the biblical scholar, they've got two opinions on where Paran is. Maybe there's two Parans actually. It seems to me that there's two Parans. Like sometimes you have a city, more than one city with one name. Like Alexandria, where I'm from. There's many Alexandria. I wrote down something when I was in Egypt. I said, how do I get from Alexandria to... They were giving me these things in America. There's Alexandria in America. So sometimes you have a city, like London. There's a London somewhere in Canada. You know, there's sometimes a city, more than one name for a city. Paran is one of those kind of cities. But look at what the biblical scholars are saying. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran. This is generally allowed to have been a part of the desert belonging to Arabian Petria in the vicinity of Mount Sinai. So let's see some of the references of that. The Strong Biblical Bible Dictionary also tells Paran is the desert of Arabia. Cebius, a 7th century Armenian bishop and historian, when describing the Arab conquest, he said, when we covered Cebius already, by the way, he said they assembled and came out of Paran. So it's as if he understood that was the Paran of the Bible. He understood they assembled and came out of Paran. Yeah. The Bible tells us that Paran is the very place where Ishmael dwelt. While Ishmael, was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. The Talmud, this is the Talmud. The Palestinian Talmud states the following: 8,000 apprentice priests fled to the army. I've always had a problem pronouncing this king's name, yeah, which is
Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah.
You guys say it. Can you say it?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah.